Welcome. What is up? Welcome to the Mixer. I am your host, RC. I'm joined by my co-host here, Jeff. How you doing?
I'm doing good, man. It's good to be back.
Awesome. Let's get into it. First things first, do not forget to like and to subscribe to our podcast on iTunes, Google Podcasts, Spotify. We are on YouTube. It's the Mixer channel, and we are at FCY Mixer on all social channels. Again, best place to follow is on Twitter at FCY Mixer. Check out the links in the show notes if you want to go directly there. Make it nice and convenient for you. This week, I'm going to skip tilt. I got nothing to tilt, nothing at all. These hands are made of diamonds. That's all I'm going to say. And I had an awesome Father's Day. So what could be going wrong? And Jeff, if I'm not mistaken, life's good over there in your neck of the woods too.
Yeah, exactly. We're actually getting ready to come back to San Diego. We're going to drive down next Monday. But yeah, life is going well. So,
woot woot, as the kids say. Let's get straight into it. I'm hyped on F1 right now. Some say it's the fastest growing sport in America. It's no longer lacrosse, which is the fastest sport on 2 feet. This is the fastest sport on 2 wheels. Nope, scratch that. 4 wheels. Just had a recount. I think I got Mercedes strategy providing me the tire count. Anyway, but yeah, let's get into it. So we had the French Grand Prix at the Circuit de Paul Ricard. I think it's just Paul Ricard. I'm not sure of the name. It's not too important. French Grand Prix, testing track normally, stripes everywhere. Big testing track for Le Mans. That's that's the site for this week. Jeff, were you aware prior to this week that France held the first Grand Prix?
I was not, actually. I don't know a whole lot of Formula One history yet. I'm sure I will as I get more into it. But that was news to me.
So, and it was at the historic Le Mans circuit, and I believe it was in 1906. Anywho, just a little nugget of information for you out there. The origin of Formula One, France, or the origin of Grand Prix, we'll say, France. It's not Formula One back then. All right, but let's get into it. So, qualifying, we had Verstappen put it on pole, and we had Hamilton second, Bottas in third, and Verstappen fourth. Then we had the next best. Pretty normal qualifying composition for this season. I will say, in the preview, I said I expect Alonso will have a good weekend, and he made it to Q3. I think he qualified 7th. He was definitely in the top 10, but anywho, so shouts to us on that.
He qualified 9th, I believe, because he moved up 1 spot in the race.
There we go. Well, good to see Fernando out there putting some good times in his Alpine, which has improved since the season started. Let's get into the race, though, because we got a lot to get to. Pretty clean start. There was rain in the Formula 3 race, which I don't know if it was earlier that day or if it was after qualifying on Saturday, but washed the track a little bit, and there was a bit of wind. Supposedly the wind caught out Verstappen in the second corner. He led into the first corner, ran wide in the second corner, gave up the lead to Hamilton, who was able to build a 3-second gap in that opening stint of the race. At that point, I mean, if you're listening to the broadcast, they were mentioning that the undercut was going to be, the move for this race. It was more of an advantage than at typical races. But Hamilton with that 3-second lead, the theory being, maybe Verstappen can gain a second per lap on the undercut. They thought Hamilton had him covered with that 3-second lead. So Red Bull deployed the undercut, brought Verstappen in. Hamilton stayed out. Then he stayed out for another lap. One lap too long. When he rejoined the track after his pit stop, he was the second. He came out behind Verstappen. Jeff, what are your thoughts at this point in the race? I'm curious to hear your take.
A couple thoughts. The first one is that, you knew pretty early on, like you mentioned, that tires probably weren't going to last. I mean, they knew that. Guys were saying right away on lap like 2 or 3 that their tires were wearing more than expected. And that was on the opening mediums. So right away you knew they probably weren't going to get as far as they wanted to. Mercedes, I think this is the first mistake Mercedes made, was that Hamilton stayed out after Max pitted, right? And he did the lap. Max was behind him, so they didn't have the option to just follow, right? Which, understandable. And like you said, Lewis had the 3-second lead, but it was the second lap that he stayed out that I think cost him that lead going back out. And I think that was a mistake, right? That's probably mistake number 1 for them in the race. But my thought there, though, is, the Mercedes all weekend, at least I was hearing from the sources that I watch, that they were likely the faster race pace, even though Max got pole, right? So Max was probably faster on his one lap, but Mercedes should be able to catch them over the distance of the race. So even Lewis coming out in second, probably not the biggest deal as long as everyone goes to the end, right? So that was my thought there. We didn't know everyone's strategy yet, but I thought if they all stayed on hard tires, I thought Lewis would catch him and Lewis would win.
Undoubtedly a mistake leaving Hamilton out for that extra lap.
I also thought Valtteri was going to have a better race. Not that I actually don't think where he finished was his fault at all. But I thought he would be on the podium with Max and Lewis.
Yeah, I think Mercedes has been saying that for 2 or 3 seasons now. So you're not alone in that call. Mercedes, obviously questionable decision there, leaving Hamilton out. It didn't work out. So that was around lap 20 when that happened. I think Hamilton came in lap 22 and Verstappen came in lap 20. I could be, it actually might have been sooner. But anywho, so we're about a third of the way into the race. Hamilton can't close down the gap to Verstappen. Verstappen builds the gap. And then Mercedes had a decision. Do they try to undercut Max to essentially do the same thing to see if they can regain the lead? Do they leave him out and not pit him? All eyes were on the two guys running 1 and 2. Ended up Red Bull didn't take the chance and they pitted first. They pitted Verstappen on lap 32. He switched back to the mediums. He rejoined in 4th place. He moved up to 3rd. Perez letting him by, running a different strategy. And he was gaining on Hamilton about 2 seconds per lap when he came out on those mediums. Mercedes left both Hamilton and Bottas out, running 1 to 2, or running 1-2. On the broadcast, the announcer said, the Sky Sports guys that we get here in the U.S. on ESPN. They mentioned Mercedes has an advantage here. You could split strategies. You could bring in one driver to either mimic Red Bull to, run the same strategy, but they elected to leave both drivers out. And at first I was thinking, why didn't they split them? And then towards the, last third or last quarter of the race, the strategy kind of made sense to me, because then you have Bottas there acting like a pick, essentially, to keep Verstappen at bay and hold him up and maybe give Hamilton just enough to hang on, because obviously Verstappen was closing on him, but his tires are going to wear as well. But Bottas did not do a great job holding up Verstappen at all. And on with 10 laps remaining, Verstappen caught Bottas, and then on lap 44, Verstappen passed Bottas. What were your thoughts at this point in the race, Jeff?
Well, with how quickly he passed Bottas, I was pretty confident Max was going to win at that point. I think there was a point after this where it looked like Max's tires had given out, which brought a little bit of hope back to Lewis. But then he found it again. But at this point in the race, Valtteri he'd already been vocal about thinking it should have been a two-stop. And you could see that with how fast Max was gaining on him, Valtteri made a mistake. And I think part of it was, in his head, and obviously driving, his tires aren't the best. And now he's going, I got to hold this guy off, and he's clearly faster than me. And I think it just caused him to make a little mistake. He obviously didn't go into the wall or anything. But it seemed he made a little driving mistake, and then Max was able to get around him pretty quickly coming out of a turn. And in the end, I think it actually may have cost Lewis the race. Because if Valtteri can hold Max there for a lap or two, Max caught him with a lap and a half, 2 laps left. Valtteri didn't have to do a whole lot, I don't think, but he had to hold him off for a little while. And not doing that, and Max getting the clean air at that point, kind of just made it seem like, okay, he's going to catch Lewis. Then it was just, does Sergio catch Valtteri at that point?
Yeah, disappointed in Bottas's effort to hold up Verstappen. He defended on the inside and then overshot in the chicane, and Verstappen just kind of up and under him to make that move work. I think I hit you with a message right away that Bottas should have brake checked him. I mean, he should have known that Verstappen was going to be diving on the inside, and if he would have just held his position and eased off and came out, I mean, at that point you're risking an accident, and also you don't know what Bottas can see in his mirrors, because the mirrors on these cars are kind of useless in most cases. So, and who am I to criticize driving tactics? I'm just saying, in my 50-50 hindsight analysis, that's what he should have done. But regardless, come on, man. We can put up a better effort than that. So,
yeah.
Verstappen hawks down Hamilton, and it makes short work of him. There were 5 laps remaining after Verstappen got around Bottas. He was about 3 seconds behind, and Verstappen passed Hamilton with 4 laps to go, or maybe it was 2 laps to go. Sorry, I'm reading over notes here, and they're not following the linear route that I thought they were. But regardless, Verstappen got around Hamilton and took the lead and went on to win the race. And we had Perez eventually catching Bottas as well, getting 2 Red Bulls on the podium, first and third. Hamilton finishes second. Also of note in this race, McLaren had a really impressive day. Ferrari just had, definitely the worst race of the season, and arguably the worst race for a long time. You had Sainz finishing 11th, and Leclerc all the way down in 16th after qualifying 7th. We had the aforementioned McLarens. Lando Norris finished 5th. Daniel Ricciardo had a really good race, a really good weekend. He finished 6th. Pierre Gasly, who's been consistent, finished 7th. We mentioned Fernando Alonso finishing 8th. We had Sebastian Vettel and Lance Stroll in there. Aston Martin's finishing 9th and 10th. So their car seems to be backing up the performance at Baku. Anywho, Jeff, all in all, what are your thoughts on the results here? Red Bull taking a commanding lead in the constructors as well in the drivers. What are your thoughts at this point in the season on how things are shaking out?
Yeah, so, we were talking a little bit pre-show, but I think, this race to me gave me a different feeling than I've had in the past. Obviously, as a fairly new Formula One fan, I'm used to Lewis and Mercedes just kind of winning everything. And this kind of gives me the feeling like Red Bull's going to win it this year. I think Max likely takes the first of a couple drivers' championships in his career. And I think Red Bull gets back on top in the Constructors' Championship. And I was telling you a little bit before, the reasons I kind of think that are the last couple of years watching. I guess this started last year in the race where George Russell replaced Lewis. I forget what race that was. But George should have won. It was the race that Sergio actually won. But George should have won. He was in the lead. And what did Mercedes do? They put the wrong tires on his car. They made a huge mistake, which, obviously caused another pit stop. And then he got that puncture later, right?
Yeah, the race that you're speaking about that Perez ended up winning, and we had the debacle with George Russell's tires. That was the Baku, or excuse me, my mind's still stuck on Baku. The Bahrain oval, quote unquote, oval race last season that was added on. Still hoping we get that back since there's going to be more races probably canceled or rescheduled this year. Mercedes has had that luxury where, they've routinely been about half a second to a full second ahead of the field in qualifying. And I think that, they just haven't been as sharp as far as the strategy goes and as far as pit stop and that sort of thing that's kind of done off the track because they haven't really needed to. So I think they've just been, kind of resting on the laurels of having that huge engine advantage that they've had in the past. And, it has cropped up in times. And for a while, that was the only reason they were losing races is when they made mistakes. And a lot of other teams make mistakes too. They don't stand out as much. But for Mercedes, it was standing out because Mercedes is going to win every race unless they make a mistake. Some other things to note about, some comments that happened after the race or during the race. Bottas on the radio said, "Why the F did nobody listen to me when I said it was going to be a two-stop strategy?" And obviously that worked out for Verstappen. The only other driver that did a two-stop was Charles Leclerc, who started P7 and ended P16. So it's not like that strategy was the sole reason for Bottas winning. I don't know that it would have made a difference in this case. I don't know how much that rain the day before threw off the subs, as the Euro announcers would like to say, the math. Yeah, they're calculations. They do all kinds of simulations. It's all planned out. They have wear rates and all that. They run it through 1,000 different simulations, and they say, okay, here's the optimal strategy. the problem with Formula One is they don't, they don't seem to adjust well in changing conditions like this, and with the wind and the rain and the degradation that was happening over the race, it seems like they caught them out. So, how do you feel about the two-stop, how it worked for Verstappen versus how the one-stop did not for Mercedes and others?
Yeah, so I think that doing a straight comparison to Leclerc isn't completely fair because, as mentioned before, the Ferrari was just having a bad day regardless. I don't think their strategy mattered a whole lot. They were going to have a poor performance. That's kind of what Sainz hinted at after the race. I think Leclerc even said something about it. But I think, looking at it, I think Red Bull, the tough thing is, though, in my opinion, if you think hards can get you to the end and you're Mercedes, I do kind of get it from their point of view. Like, make him come get us, right? Like, we have the lead, and it was a decent lead, right? But we're going to make him work for it. Okay, I get that rather than, Max undercuts, and then you bring Lewis in right away, and now you're chasing again, likely, right? And maybe it's only a little bit, maybe you end up passing it, but now it's a much closer race for a longer time. The way Mercedes did it was they said, okay, we're going to take the lead. Now, like I said, you got to chase us down. The only problem was that the only problem I had with it was that Lewis and Valtteri, and not just them, almost every other driver seemed to hint at or say at some point, like, we need another pit, right? Or we need another stop kind of thing. And
how many races do you hear that, man? I mean, it's all like 10, 15 laps or 5 laps in on a new set, and they say, graining the deg is really bad. So I don't know that we can rely on the drivers and their panicked radio transmissions at 200 plus miles an hour to be impartial on.
No, I definitely agree with that, and I definitely think like it needs to be a team decision. But when you have something like this where the decision clearly backfires, and not just once, right? Like, it'd be different if, I think the conversation would be a little bit different if, even if Max wins and catches Lewis, but if Valtteri is able to hold off Sergio, then you go, okay, well, Max, maybe he just had it, but the strategy wasn't the worst thing. But in this case, you have Sergio catch Valtteri too, and then it's like, okay, both these guys complained about it, and both of them, what they said was going to happen happened, essentially, right? I think that's where it's kind of like, maybe the strategy should have been different, or maybe they should have done what Red Bull did, and either Lewis or Valtteri stays out for an extra like 6 or 7 laps, right? Because Sergio didn't pit until lap 25 or something like that, whereas everyone else. Not everyone else, but the top guys all pitted around 18, 19, 20. So Sergio had a few less laps at the end there on his tires.
Yeah, and I mean that's another reason too why I think they left Hamilton and Bottas out, because if either one of them would have pit, then Red Bull could just run their one guy and split their strategies, which they did. But Perez could have been in the lead and basically did the same thing,
right.
Backed up Hamilton and Bottas into Verstappen. So, I mean, it's really interesting to see how the strategies play out and how they use their two drivers to work as a team to get the best result for both their drivers. But my general takeaway and commentary on the race is it's not as simple as Mercedes should have done a two-stopper. They definitely messed up leaving Hamilton out there to get caught by the undercut, but ultimately I think Verstappen had the better car for the race and, was the best driver on the track this weekend, and that's why he won. And, and Perez finishing third is just further evidence that Red Bull had the better car this weekend. So I mean, hats off to Red Bull, hats off to Verstappen. We are not a pro Verstappen podcast, but he got the win this week, and deservedly so. I did want to kind of transition into talking about what this season and what this title challenge is going to mean for Lewis Hamilton and his legacy. So right now we have Verstappen leading the drivers race, the drivers championship. He's got 131 points compared to Lewis Hamilton's 119. Sergio Perez is in third for the brand with 84 points. And Red Bull has a lead in the constructors over Mercedes, 215 to 178. A pretty big gap there. It's been a while since Mercedes has been challenged. As a matter of fact, I don't know that they've ever really had a big title challenge. They just all of a sudden were the, were the big bad on the grid. And, they've just kind of reigned supreme for, I think it was 2015 when they started dominating. I'm not looking, not off of the, I'm not referring to anything, but at the top of my head, that's about when their engine dominance kind of took over. So this is a race that, although Hamilton did not have the best car, I would say, did not maybe have the best strategy, but if he wants to be considered the greatest driver of all time, these are the types of races that he needs to win. He has never won a championship where it's been in a fight. Well, okay, I'm gonna have to put a big old asterisk on that, because his first one was a fight. It was a fight to the end that he should not have won. In 2008, he should not have won. Timo Glock could not keep his Toyota going in the rain, and Hamilton got by him, and won and broke Felipe Massa's and my heart, and that one mechanic in the garage, and gave probably Nicole Scherzinger the best moment of her life.
Hey, but real quick, I just have a question. If you're going to say, oh, wait, he shouldn't have won, but what about his rookie year when his own teammate sabotaged his chances at a certain point by, screwing him up in a pit?
Yeah, I was going to get to that. The year he should have won a close race or close title was, that was his rookie year in 2007, but he did not, partially because of that, partially because he beached his car heading into the pits at the Chinese Grand Prix, back in 2007. So, and there were some other little minor mistakes that he made along the way. But anywho, any of these other seasons, these titles with Mercedes and McLaren, he had the best car, and he just hasn't won that close. There's been a few of Vettel's titles where it came down to the last race, and Vettel was able to snatch it away because of bad performances at Abu Dhabi. And you just haven't seen Hamilton clutch up too often in situations like this. Usually he wins the races where, he's 30 seconds ahead and dominates. As opposed to somebody, I can only speak to drivers that I've seen regularly, and I watched a lot of Michael Schumacher, and he would routinely need 5 qualifying pace laps, basically, at the end of a stint or at the beginning, so that he could jump somebody in the pits, because back then there was far less passes on track, and he did it. And, he won 5, 6 titles. Again, I don't have it right in front of me, but he won a lot. He won a lot of races that way. He won a lot of titles that way. So Hamilton, Hamilton's definitely in the discussion for greatest driver of all time, but he needs to win races like this, and he needs to really grit out a title run if he's going to be considered in the upper echelon of names. I mean, regardless, he's going to be, but for me at least, I cannot put him up there as the greatest driver of all time unless he wins a contested title.
I mean, I can understand that. I think that I have one counter to that, and this is not necessarily a Formula One thought, but I'm going to relate this to basketball because I remember ESPN doing a study on this at one point. And you talk about, close race wins and stuff like that. And I don't think, in my opinion, judging like fourth quarter comebacks or like close race wins is a great way to tell greatness. The reason being is like for a long time, LeBron got crap as not being a closer, right? Not being the one to like hit the big shot and this and that. A lot of people for a long time, even still, you ask a lot of people and they'll take Jordan, they'll take Kobe, they'll take a lot of people over LeBron, right? Even though if you look at his history of hitting game-winning shots or hitting, tying shots or go-ahead shots at the end of games, he's up there with all those guys in terms of like, he's got a better percentage than Jordan and Kobe. I know that. And he just may not have taken as many, right? And I remember ESPN did a study on this, and they found that with 5 minutes left to go in a basketball game, if the game was within 5 points, LeBron was more likely to put that game out of reach than he was to keep it close to where he would even get an opportunity to hit a game winner versus like Kobe, who they did the direct relation with. Kobe, in the same situation, game within 5 points, last 5 minutes, was more likely to lead his teams to a closer finish, which then resulted in more opportunities for those game-winning, game-tying shots at the end of games. So I think there's different ways to look at greatness. Now, Formula One, you have to take the car into account, which you don't in other sports. And so I think that, that kind of throws a wrench into it. But I think just because someone wins and wins in a dominant fashion, I personally don't think they should have to win a contested championship to be seen as like the greatest ever. But this is also a conversation that's very subjective, right? So that's just my view on it. I actually went because you presented this to me, and I went and I found 538. They did a who's the best Formula One driver of all time in 2018 after the 2018 season. And they do not have Lewis as the best. It also doesn't count his last 2 championships, right?
Ooh, can I guess? Can I guess before you?
Yeah, let me tell you the setup first, though. So they don't do the driver's whole career, right? Because the car matters, the team matters, stuff like that. So they took the driver's best 5 years, right? And they used ELO. So if you know anything about ELO, ELO is normally a win, lose, or draw type situation. The way they did it essentially was they took the field, and if, for example, the French Grand Prix, Max would go, I think they only went to like 13 places. I don't think they did the full field, but Max would essentially go like 15-0, right? Because he beat all those other drivers. Lewis would go 14-1. Sergio would go 13-2, that type of thing, right? So you're getting like, if you win the race, you get all the wins and no losses. Okay, so if you know how ELO works, you get a little bit of rating points for a win, a little bit for a loss, that kind of stuff, right? That way your rating builds up over time.
Did they scale it for variable grid?
I don't remember exactly. I'm just looking at their list. They have the methodology down here. So here's what they say. They say driver and car are considered to be inseparable from ELO's point of view. Each session or race is treated as if it were a round-robin one-on-one tournament. And so they did 15 cars. ELO includes each race that awards Formula One championship points in the primary qualifying session for that race. If a driver fails to finish the race, whether because of mechanical failure or crash, they treat it as if the driver didn't compete in that race. So they do, throw in the caveat that guys who crash out, may not be harmed the way they should, right? But realistically, if we're talking about the greatest drivers of all time, they're not crashing out very often, right? So very few of those should come into play. But yeah, so this is a 5-year ELO rating. So I have the list down to 30. I have 1 to 30. But if you want to guess, go for it. And I'll tell you where people are if you want to know.
How far back does this go?
There's someone on here list from 1953 to 1957.
Okay.
So it goes a ways back.
So that 53 to 57 is probably Fangio, and I know that he should be top 5. He is, I can't, I haven't seen any races from the 50s. I just know from watching clips and reading the history, but I feel like he should be top 5. He's the one who I have a hard time comparing to Senna, to Prost, to Schumacher, to Mansell, and those names, because it's just so back in the past. I know he has an impressive win rate of like 40%. He won like 40% of the races that he entered. So, I'm curious of how his numbers would show up on something like this, but back then they were only racing like 8 races per year, whereas in the 90s it was, I think, between 15 to 20, and there were bigger grids, so that's why I asked about the scalability, and we might have somebody like Senna or Prost. Prost dominated one year in the Williams because it had active suspension, and he won like nearly every race. So if you have that in there, that's going to spike his ratings a little bit. So with that metric, and especially the fact that they don't punish early exits, and we're looking at the best 5 years, and I feel like the top 3 are going to be some form of Fangio, Senna, Prost, and then maybe Schumacher and Ascari in the top 5. How many of those? And if I had to guess, I'm just going to say Fangio as the number 1, because if he is, I feel like I'll get some extra cred points.
So Fangio is 5th. You had him top 5. That was pretty solid.
Yeah.
You only got 1 out of the top 3 on your first 3 guesses. Senna is listed at number 1. And that's from years 1988 to 1992. Schumacher is 2nd from 2000 to 2004. I believe that includes his streak of 4 straight wins. 4 straight drivers wins.
Yeah.
Right? And then they have Hamilton, 2014 to 2018, Lewis, as number 3.
Brand.
Again, that doesn't include his 14 out of 21 season in 2019, or his 2020. So I wonder what these numbers would look like if they updated them to today, which I don't think they have, because 538 usually pretty easy to find their updates, and I don't see an update to this, so I'm assuming they haven't done it. They have Vettel at number 4. 2009 to 2013 Vettel.
Yeah, I could see that. I don't know how much of it was due to Vettel's car, because it's tough to tell with Vettel, because he kind of has like the same thing as Hamilton, where Red Bull was just dominant, and and he had teammates that challenged him. That's a fascinating list. I would love to take more of a look at it if you don't mind sending to that to me. Maybe I can link it in the show notes if any listeners would like to check that out. Hamilton, undoubtedly a great driver. For the reasons mentioned before, he's in the discussion of greatest all time. I would just like to see him again, really grit one out and, come from behind because, you just haven't seen him do that. He's lost to teammates in the past, which in title races, he lost to Jenson Button. He lost to Nico Rosberg. The only two teammates that he beat on a regular basis were Heikki Kovalainen. Heikki who? Exactly. Heikki Kovalainen and Valtteri Bottas. So how much of that is just due to Hamilton being a team player? I actually think Hamilton is a little more cool-headed and willing to go along with a team than people give him credit for. I feel like those years against when he did lose to Jenson and Nico, he just kind of held tight. He's always been a good teammate. That 1 year with Fernando, maybe taught him a lesson. I don't know if it's a personality thing, but he doesn't get enough credit for the role he plays as a teammate. He never had, like Vettel and Weber, would butt heads, and there's just been other teammates that have butted heads in the past, and you only really had that with that first year with Hamilton and Alonso. So, I mean, of course, I've been not really anti-Hamilton, but you guys would chirp me about Hamilton being the GOAT because you guys knew I was a Ferrari fan, and at the time nobody really knew too much about Formula One, and now that I've kind of like bought in and started betting and rooting on Hamilton, of course, like he's facing some adversity, but that's good because I like an underdog, and if Verstappen's the big bad now, I can get behind Hamilton winning, and he's just been such a great ambassador for the sport. I don't know that we have the Drive to Survive, but I don't know if people would be tuning in without a figure like Lewis Hamilton, who's super into fashion. He's into social media. He's into equality for all. He's got this big platform. He was one of the first people of all celebrities, all athletes that I saw do like a hand washing video during COVID-19. Drive to Survive documented his thoughts towards the Australian Grand Prix last year during COVID. He was like, "Why are we here? I'll tell you why we're here. Cash is king." That's what he said. And I'm a huge fan of his, and I would really enjoy him, gritting this one out. And I feel like if you don't have the best tires, if you don't have the best strategy, the greats find a way to do it. And if he does do it this year, it is going to be hard to not put him at the top of the list of the greatest drivers of all time.
Yeah.
Woohoo! Formula One, man. I am hyped, dude. Who would have thought? Who would have thought that it would have so much attention right now? And God, I hope this season goes down to the wire, because there's nothing like a title race, or drivers' championship constructors in Formula One. It gets tense, man. Imagine like 1-2 started the grid down to the last race, going into that first corner. When the lights go out, man, it is awesome. All right, let's get into some other sports, shall we? Just touch on a few things. We have the NBA playoffs going on. We got the Clippers and Suns. The Suns are up 1-0. We have the Bucks and the Hawks, who have they played a game yet? There was no NBA last night, so do they play?
No, they haven't.
So the Clips play tonight. Does that mean the Bucks Hawks are tomorrow, game one?
I believe so.
CP3 still out due to COVID. Kawhi does not seem like he's going to play in this series. Maybe he'll be available for the finals. Is it going to be Suns in 4, Jeff, or what do we got here?
I don't think it's Suns in 4 unless if they win tonight and CP3 comes back for game 3, then I could see Suns in 4. I just have a feeling the Clippers are going to find a way to win tonight. I do think the Suns still pull it out. I think they're the better team, especially without Kawhi. But yeah, it should be a good series though. We got a great performance from Devin Booker in game 1. Paul George looks like old Paul George at this point. So it should be exciting.
You're the second person that told me you feel like the Clips are gonna take this one, and nobody has been saying that the Clips are gonna win any games this finals. As the lifelong Clippers fan that I am, I bet the Suns and them to cover the points tonight. So that most certainly means that the Clippers are probably gonna win. But yeah, hopefully we get a good series out of that. Depending on when CP3 comes back, that might make it a entertaining series versus not if Kawhi can't make it back. But I don't know enough about basketball to say that for sure. But I have been enjoying watching the games. What do you think about the storyline kind of with the Eastern Conference Finals? Is the team that's not there, the Nets, got knocked out? We didn't get to talk about that before last episode. I guess it happened after. So Durant with a clutch 2 to force overtime, which was super disappointing that it wasn't a 3. It then airballed the same opportunity in overtime, and the Nets lost. Jeff, what are your thoughts about the Nets getting bounced and Durant's heroic performance, but coming up short ultimately?
Yeah, it was tough. I feel bad for the Nets because they're a really, really good team. They just got a little unlucky with injuries, right? Harden hurts himself, less than a minute into game 1. Kyrie rolls his ankle on Giannis. And it's, one of those things where you can't avoid it. Like, it happened to the Lakers as well. And it just happens some years, right? It's just not your year. It gave us some amazing Durant performances. We got, obviously his game-tying shot that I think he thought was a game winner. Unfortunately, it wasn't. Then overtime, it looked like everyone was gassed, and he just didn't have the legs at the end, which is why it resulted in an air ball. But it was a great performance by him, great performance by Giannis. It was a fun series to watch. It was very back and forth. And those are the kind of things we like to see in the playoffs, right? We like those game 7s. We like those close games. Just makes it a lot more fun. I am kind of glad to get the Bucks into the conference finals, though. I do kind of want Giannis to win a title so people can lay off him a little bit, even though he does have flaws. For someone that has won 2 MVPs, I would venture to say he's probably the most flawed player to have that accomplishment. And what I mean is that you can kind of scheme against him. We've seen it in the playoffs multiple years where, you play a certain way defensively and force him to become a jump shooter, and he might still get some numbers, but it looks good for your team at that point. So, but I'm glad. I'm super excited for the Hawks. I've been bugging my friend Jason about it. Huge Trae Young fan. And so I really want them to win, but I don't think it's going to happen.
Yeah, I messaged you that, I said, is Trae Young the guy you don't like? Because I couldn't remember who, and you're like, no, I love him. And I was like, that makes sense because he seems kind of like a tool. But yeah, after watching that whole game, I haven't watched too many Hawks games. He's entertaining for sure. I guess I haven't decided, but he does look like the kid who in my elementary and middle school thwarted my efforts of being the fastest kid in school. I remember he wasn't even like, he was a new kid. He was a new kid. I had like all the first grade just dominating PE, running laps, literally running laps. I was like Lewis Hamilton in the late 2010s, And then this kid shows up like Verstappen, and all of a sudden, he's 5 seconds quicker than me per lap, and my freaking foundation was shook, man. I mean, I had that, that was going to be my jam for all of my school. Anyway, but yeah, he looks like him. Nick Campbell, if you're out there, I hope you're doing well, but you kind of broke my heart when you came as a new student that one spring. He ended up being a pretty good friend of mine for throughout middle school and such. But anyway, yeah, are people really giving Giannis a hard time? He's only been in the league, 3 years, 2 years?
No, he's 26. He came in the league when he was like 18.
Shows how much I know. Anyway, yeah, I think I'm rooting. Well, I don't really have a rooting interest in the East, so entertaining games is what I'm rooting for. I did want to touch on one last thing before we get out of here, Jeff. We have the Dodgers in town. The Padres took Game 1. They swept the Reds. I was going to bring up Tatis versus Vlad here. I don't know if we have enough time. What do you want to touch on? Do you want to touch on the Padres, baseball in general, or Tatis versus Vlad in a 5-minute segment that we can do real quick?
Let's knock out Tatis versus Vlad. First thing I want to say before we get into this is they're both amazing. Mm-hmm. I don't want anyone to listen to this and think oh man, they think one of them sucks or something like that. No, both of them are great, and Tatis is already probably the face of baseball, but Vlad is on his way there as well. So,
make the case for Vlad, because obviously I got to be Team Tatis. So, what do you think about Vlad makes him the best player in baseball?
Well, I don't know if Vlad's actually the best player in baseball. So personally, this is going to go against a long-held belief of mine, but I think Jacob deGrom is the best player in baseball as of right now. I've never really thought a pitcher could be, but he's just so much better than everyone else that it's just kind of clear. But I'll give you just some thoughts on Vlad real quick. Vlad's more of a traditional hitter that I like. Higher batting average, lower strikeout rate, higher walk rate, hits the ball incredibly hard. Him and Tatis, you're looking at a lot of their batted ball numbers. They're very similar. Vlad has hit a home run on 7.5% of the balls he's put on 7.5% of the at-bats that he's had, whereas Tatis is at 9.5% this year. So I think, the thing with Tatis that I think is, and this is going to come off, and the words I'm using probably aren't the best, but I think having a 9.5% home run rate is unsustainable. And I think a lot of his numbers are good, but I see him being the kind of hitter that he is, just with a few less home runs. I don't see him being a league leading home run guy. I do see him getting to 35, maybe 40, but he's at 22 right now. And I think that's kind of fluky. That's just personal opinion. Also, I think that, and this is more of a longer standing between the two of them, but at every stage of their lives until they got to the major leagues, Vlad was always the better prospect. Tatis came up, balled out. Then he balled out again last year, and he's balling out again this year. Vlad, before this year, said he looked at Tatis and kind of used him as an example, and Vlad Vlad admitted his whole life he's never really had to work at it, right? Obviously he had to put in work, but he's never had to worry about being in shape or anything like that. He's just always gone out there and hit and just mashed. And he said this offseason he put a new focus on getting in shape and improving some things, and we've seen that clearly reflected in his game. And when I made the comment to our group chat, it wasn't to put Fernando down. It was more saying, I think Vlad's achieving his, like, where we thought he was going to be, right? Because Vlad came up, like, don't get me wrong, Fernando was looked at as a really good prospect, but Vlad was the best player in the minors for like 3 years in a row. Maybe not that long, but for a while. And just that kind of thing. Also, like I said, Vlad's hitting 330. Now, I don't think he's a 330 hitter, but he's probably more like a 310, 315 hitter. Whereas Tatis is, I think, right now at 280, something like that. And I think that's probably, or he's at 290. And I think that's about max for him. I don't ever see him really being better than that. I see him being closer to 280, 275. And that's really the difference for me. Also, one of them stays on the field and one of them doesn't. And that is huge when it comes to being the best player in anything, is just how often can you be the best player for me? Like, if you're the best player for half a season, you're not the best player. That's just my opinion.
Yeah, so you make a lot of good points there. Vlad, coming into the season, I think he dropped some weight because he had been, it just wasn't a focus of his to be in peak shape, and I think you alluded to that a little bit. He's never had to try at it. I mean, when your dad just crushed and mashed balls and you have those genes, yeah, maybe you don't have to work as hard. By the way, Vlad, elite tier swing senior. Oh, he was like my favorite non-Padre. He just murdered the ball. So I've been tracking Guerrero Jr. I would always stash him on my bench in the fantasy baseball league we have, even though he was in the minors. Tatis's numbers, when healthy, are pretty insane. They're, like you said, either unsustainable or he's going to be the best player ever. Period. It's crazy. The thing I will say about Tatis, he's still growing. He's still putting on weight, and I think he's even grown like an inch or two since he's come into the league. He's still young. I think him and Vlad are the same age. Vlad was definitely, or Junior. Sorry, when I'm saying Vlad, I mean Vlad Junior. He had that run where he was mashing. Tatis was slumping, and then now his shoulder may or may not be jacked up again. But I think he had 2 doubles yesterday. Anyway, first game back. But, just some advanced metrics to look at this to kind of build the case for Tatis so far. He has, in his last 424 at-bats, he has 39 home runs. Vlad, over last season and this season, had 473 at-bats and 32 home runs. So advantage to Tatis there. Tatis has walked more. Exit velocity of batted balls. Vlad is at 93.7 average over the last 2 seasons. Fernando's at 94.4. The mid-launch angle, that has been a struggle for Vlad. He was rolling over the top of a lot of balls. He's improved this season, but it's at 7.8 degrees, whereas Tatis's launch angle is at 11.7 for this season. And so Vlad has room to improve, whereas, this might be Tatis's ceiling, albeit that ceiling is super high. If he's still growing, I don't know. We could be seeing some really insane stuff that Tatis accomplishes over a season. So, like you said, it is too early to say where this is going to wind up. We're ultimately both the winners here because we get to watch these guys for at least the next 10 seasons be competitive if Tatis' shoulder doesn't fall off.
Exactly. And one thing I do want to say, too, is, like, elite guys break the mold all the time, right? So, like, we look at projections or historical comparisons, stuff like that all the time. with players, and guys that are historically great don't follow along those lines, right? So, like, don't get me wrong. Like, if I'm saying like Tatis is, like, one thing I'm going to say here in a second. So Tatis has a career home run percent of over 7%. If we look at the all-time home run leader, Barry Bonds, his career home run percent was 6%, right? So 6% of his at-bats, he hit a home run. I just don't see a way Tatis maintains being a full percent better than the all-time home run leader. That's just my view. The year Tatis is having this year, Barry Bonds only had 2 years hitting a home run more often than Tatis is so far. Not saying he can't do it for the full season. Not saying he can't do it for a full career. I'm just saying it's extremely unlikely. And that's all. But like I said, elite players break those conventional thoughts all the time. That's what makes them elite. And he could do this for the rest of his career, and he might hit 800 home runs. Who knows? Right? Because like you said, he's still filling out, and once they get him away from shortstop, where he's not particularly a plus on defense, and move him to a more conducive and less injury-prone position.
This is the San Diegan you're talking about. We do not recognize or acknowledge Tatis's errors in the field. They are fake news propagated by the media that is just trying to build this culture against him.
It's not a culture against him. Tatis is great, and he makes some amazingly flashy plays.
Somebody wise once said, "Comment a heel." So
he would already be a third baseman if Machado weren't there. That's all I'm going to say about Tatis.
I hear they might be moved on to center field. Anyway, we got time in. 14-year contract, so we got plenty of time to debate where Tatis should or shouldn't be on the field. Maybe we'll have the DH in the NL, which would be great for extending his career because he's just an animal anytime he's out in the field or running the bases. So let's keep some tread on those tires. Let's make it a 2-stopper for Tatis.
Exactly.
Bringing it back full circle. So, yeah, unless you got anything else, I think it's time to wrap here. Another great one in the books.
I don't, man. It was fun. And I'll be in San Diego next week. Maybe we can get together sometime.
Awesome. Yeah, that'd be awesome. So thank you for listening. Do not forget to rate and review, share around. There's a link to the survey in the show notes, so check that out. Let us know the type of content you want. The download numbers have been great. But we appreciate you. Jeff, get some PF Chang's, dude.
Let's do it.
All right. Later, guys.